Boldwood presents The House Sitter, written by Keri Beevis and read by Shakira Shute. For my sister-in-law, Nikki, always smiling, never complaining, and one of the bravest people I know, though she can be a muppet at times. Prologue. 6 years ago. Right about now, the woman in the barn is supposed to be getting married. She is wearing her wedding dress, but her beautifully styled hair is coming loose from its bun, her carefully applied makeup covered in dirt. And instead of walking down the aisle, she is on her hands and knees, crying and begging for her life. Her mum and dad, her husband-to-be, her bridesmaids, are all waiting for her back at Rosewood Manor, the pretty but exclusive venue in the Lake District, with a ridiculously long waiting list. And today, Saturday the 8th of June, is the date she has been planning for the last 2 years. The sunny, cloudless blue sky she had hoped for should be making her smile. Instead, the heat has been irritating her all morning, the sticky warmth enveloping her, her bridal gown almost suffocating. It's why she had made excuses, telling her mother and bridesmaids she needed a moment to herself. That was when clarity had hit, and she had realized she couldn't go through with the ceremony. At least not until she had spoken to him first. That's the worst bit. She came here willingly, so eager to see him. She was giddy with nerves and desperate to escape. But now she understands it was all a setup. What a fool she has been. She is supposed to be the star of the show today, and the rest of the wedding party will be looking for her. They have probably tried to call her, but her phone is back at the venue in the pearl clutch bag she had bought to go with her dress. Although this abandoned barn is just 5 minutes' drive from the village of Hawkshead, it is discreet, set back from the road, and approached by foot. No one will have heard her screams. Her pretty white wedding dress, the one with the delicate lace bodice and the price tag that had made her father visibly wince when he saw his credit card bill, is now torn and dirty. The first blow from the shovel had caught the back of her skull, sending her crashing face first to the filthy floor, and for a few moments she had lost consciousness. The second strike had come as she managed to roll over, staring up at her attacker in a blur of confusion, pain, and nausea. She is certain it has broken her nose. As her head throbs and the metallic taste of blood drips into her mouth, she looks up through tear-stained eyes and pleads for mercy. Rage stares back at her, and she understands it won't be forthcoming. Her final thought as the shovel raises, ready to strike again, is that today was supposed to be the start of her new life. Instead, it's going to be the end of it. Chapter 1. Present day. Saturday, the 2nd of August. When Nina Fairchild was first asked to look after her brother Dexter's cat while he was away, the plan was to pop in once a day, make a fuss of Hannibal, and take care of his food and litter. But then, 3 days before Dexter was due to leave, her boyfriend, Michael, had proposed, and the shock of seeing him down on one knee, the sparkling ring staring up at her from the box in his hand, had changed everything. For starters, Nina realized that she wasn't in love with him. She cared about Michael, and there had definitely been a spark in the early part of their relationship. But attraction had settled into friendship, and then into a routine. She had moved in with him after just 3 months, which, in retrospect, was probably too soon, and if she was honest, she knew back then that their relationship was never meant to be long-term. But 3 months had turned into 6 years, and although they had stagnated, it had become easier to stay. There was nothing like the cold, hard shock of a ring to sober her up. Nina had believed Michael was on the same page as her. They had reached a point where sex felt like a chore and conversation had become mundane. And she was certain that the quirky little things he had once found attractive about her now annoyed him, as they did her about him. But it would seem not. They weren't vibing at all. She never had the chance to answer him when he'd popped the question, as apparently her face said it all. The fight that followed was spectacular, and had perhaps been brewing for a long time, with both of them finally revealing how they felt. Michael had admitted that he hoped his proposal would breathe new life into their relationship, while Nina had finally plucked up the courage to call time on it. Fire had burned and then simmered, fading away to a passiveness that she couldn't deal with. Michael had used the word fine a lot, and kept reiterating that they would be okay living together until they sorted things out. Truthfully, they both knew she would have to be the one to leave. It had been his house first. And although she had been contributing to bills over the time she had lived there, he earned a higher wage and could afford to buy her out. Meanwhile, Nina, who worked as a freelance editor, had no idea if she would be able to scrape enough together to afford a one-bed flat. Initially, she had thought she might have to move back in with her parents, a humiliating prospect given she had just turned 35. But then Dexter had suggested she house-sit for him and his partner, Mark, while they were away. "It will help us out," he had said, pointing out that being a ragdoll breed, Hannibal, with his striking blue eyes and lilac-mitted grey and cream coat, loved having company, before adding, "Plus, it will give you a bit of breathing space and you won't have to go stay with Mum and Dad." Nina hadn't taken much persuading. So far, Dexter and Mark were the only two she had told about the breakup, and Dexter knew she wasn't relishing breaking the news to their mother, who adored Michael and kept dropping hints about grandchildren. Dexter and Mark were going to be away for all of August, using the bulk of their summer holiday, they were both teachers, to fly over to Hong Kong, where Dexter was going to meet Mark's family for the first time. While they were gone, she would have time to try to find somewhere else to live. Telling Michael it was best they had some space, she had packed a suitcase and left the house they shared, moving herself into the plush apartment at River Heights on the first Saturday in August, hugging her brother tightly before he and Mark left for the drive to the airport. The complex was one of the newer builds in the city, and only about 7 years old, sitting on the banks of the River Wensum on the opposite side of the water to the law courts. It opened back into a V shape and comprised 2 identical blocks of apartments, generously spaced apart with their balconies overlooking pretty courtyard gardens. And, to top it all off, in the basement of the opposite building to Dexter was a swimming pool and gym for the exclusive use of the residents. It was definitely a different style of living to what Nina was used to. The house she had shared with Michael was an older-style traditional property in the quiet village of Rackheath, which was about 6 miles out of Norwich. Here in the city, in Dexter's sleek apartment with its huge waterfall shower, impressive walk-in wardrobes and smart appliances throughout, was like being in a different world. And thank God for the aircon. After a couple of washout summers, Britain was in the grip of a heat wave. The temperature had barely dipped below 30 degrees for the past week, and it was expected to get hotter. Right now, walking back from the city centre, she was dreaming of that aircon. It was gone 6 p.m., but the heat of the sun still burned through her t-shirt, drenching her in sweat. After Dexter and Mark had left, she had unpacked, familiarising herself with the apartment. Although she had visited her brother on plenty of occasions, she wanted to know how everything worked. Then she headed on foot into the city centre. She had only meant to pick up a few supplies she needed, but had been tempted by the stalls on Norwich Market, reasoning it was an affordable place to stock up on fish, fruit and veg. Now, the handles of the carrier bags were digging into her fingers as she lugged everything back across the bridge that led to the apartment complex. Glancing up, she spotted a man walking towards her, and her attention immediately piqued. His gait was confident, and he was classically handsome, dressed in beige chinos and a white linen shirt. He looked a little older than her, maybe early 40s, and reminded her a little of an old-school movie star. Did he live in one of the apartment blocks? As he neared, she noticed he had threads of grey streaking through his carefully styled dark hair, and, oh dear God, he was looking at her now, and he had the palest of eyes. Blue, she thought, though they were almost silvery, so perhaps grey. Suddenly, she was regretting the old clothes she hadn't bothered to change out of, and wishing she wasn't such a hot, sweaty mess. Pasting a quick smile on her face, she nodded at him, feeling more than a little self-conscious. "Hey," he muttered in response as they passed. Not a, "Hey, let's stop and talk," just an acknowledgement. But his deep voice and confidence was enough to quicken her heartbeat and leave her feeling a little flustered. Nina carried on walking, not daring to look back until she reached the entrance to Dexter's building, by which time he was gone. Inside the 5th-floor apartment, she cranked the aircon as high as it would go, thoughts of the man gone as she packed away the groceries and considered her evening plans. Usually, the first Saturday of the month meant drinks and dinner with her 3 closest friends, Rachel, Charlotte and Tori, something Nina normally looked forward to, though this time she had cried off sick. Their meals out were never the cheapest, and until she had gone through her finances, working out exactly how much money she had and what she would need to get her own place, she wasn't sure an expensive dinner was something she could justify paying for. Luckily, Michael had been fairly amicable when it came to picking up her share of the mortgage. She just hoped he would be as generous when it came to sitting down and discussing what he was prepared to offer in terms of a buying-out settlement. She also hadn't told her friends about the split yet, needing a few more days to process everything. It was too new and messy, and she wanted to get things straight in her head before making it public. Tonight, she would take time for herself, she decided. It was her first night in the apartment, and she would cook herself a nice meal, enjoy a glass of wine, and maybe watch a movie, indulging in the fact she could eat and watch what she wanted, without having to consider Michael. Their tastes had never been that compatible. Nina preferred spicier food to him, and Michael was only ever interested in watching art house movies and oh-so-serious dramas, while she loved horror movies and laugh-out-loud comedies. She would get to control the remote and not have to listen to his annoying sniff, a habit that hadn't bothered her in the early days of their relationship, but over the last year had set her teeth on edge whenever he did it. Deciding she would try a Moroccan spicy fish recipe she had seen, she pulled out her phone to Google the recipe and make sure she had all the ingredients, immediately distracted when she saw she had 6 missed calls and a WhatsApp message. The calls were all from her mother, and a little ball of anxiety knotted in Nina's stomach, despite knowing that Aurora Fairchild erred towards the dramatic. Was everything okay? She was about to return the call when the sound of a key turning in the lock had her looking up. Who the hell was letting themselves into Dexter's apartment? The door swung open before she could react, and her eyes widened as her mother stepped inside. Aurora was impeccably dressed as always, her presence eating up the room, even though she stood 6 inches shorter than Nina at just 5 foot tall, and she didn't look distressed at all. Still, Nina couldn't help worry. Was her dad okay? "Mum, what are you doing here?" Aurora's dark eyes locked on her daughter, and she muttered in Spanish before marching across the room. "More like, what are you doing here?" she reproached. "Michael tells me you've moved out, that he proposed to you and you decided to end things between you. Care to tell me why I didn't find this out from my own daughter?" Oh, so that was why she was here. Nina had been racked with guilt over dumping Michael, but right now she wanted to kill him. How dare he go to her mum? Did he think Aurora would be able to persuade her to go back? This wasn't how she had envisioned the rest of her Saturday going. and a knot of stress was already tightening itself between her shoulder blades. She still hadn't cooled down from her walk back from the city, and she was sticky and uncomfortable despite the aircon. "Why don't I put the kettle on, and we'll talk?" she suggested diplomatically, offering her mum a smile, which wasn't returned. "You have some explaining to do, young lady." Despite being a fully grown adult, capable of making all of her own life decisions, and having a fiery temper herself, Nina went straight back to feeling like a teenager. "I was going to tell you," she began. "Going to tell me when? Next week? Next year? Wait until I'm in my grave? Honestly, Mija, have you gone mad? What are you playing at?" "Michael and I—" "Yes, I know. Michael told me everything. Is this some kind of midlife crisis, Nina? He's a good man. He deserves better than the way you treat him." "Midlife crisis?" "I'm 35, Mum, and it's not any kind of crisis. I don't love him." "And you decide that now, after all these years, after moving in with him?" Aurora paused for breath, holding her hand up when Nina went to speak. She wasn't finished. "It was the ring, wasn't it? You panicked, but it will be okay. You and Michael are meant to be together. Once we start shopping for wedding dresses and you find the perfect venue, you will be fine." "Mum, no, stop! I don't love him!" This time, Nina enunciated the words. She could feel the beginning of a headache, and although she was trying her best to keep hold of her temper, the edges of it were fraying. "Staying with Michael isn't what he deserves, and it's not what I deserve either." Aurora looked affronted, and she still had plenty to say, veering between English and Spanish, something she tended to do when annoyed, and Nina listened with one ear as she finished making the tea. She knew her mother, sharing that same temper as well as her dark hair and olive skin tone, and sometimes it was better to let her run out of steam, even if it wasn't good for the stress levels. It was gone 7:30 p.m. when Aurora finally got up to leave, a full hour and a half of being talked at and told she was making a mistake, and even though her mother had eventually calmed, seeming to at least accept she couldn't fix the relationship, Nina was shattered. "Your room is there for you to move back into, if you're certain you're not ready to go back home." Nina didn't correct the "not ready" comment, keen to stop dwelling on the topic. "I'm house-sitting for Dexter, Mum. Thanks, though." "He knows about this, I take it." When Nina nodded, Aurora tusked and muttered under her breath. Not because Dexter hadn't said anything. Her gripe seemed to be that Nina had chosen only to tell her brother. This was only the first battle over Michael. She understood that. There would be more to come, but at least so far she had stood her ground. As an olive branch for not telling her parents about the breakup, she agreed to go over for a barbecue the following afternoon. Finally kissing her mum goodbye and closing the door, she drew in a steadying breath and took a moment to enjoy the peace and quiet of the apartment. Hannibal wandered out from behind the sofa and looked up hopefully at Nina. He probably just wanted his dinner, though in that moment it appeared he was checking the coast was clear. Nina fed him and checked his litter tray, then, remembering the fish recipe, picked up her phone again. The unread WhatsApp message was still there, and glancing at it, she saw it was from Michael. As she read it, she wished she had seen it earlier. "Hey, En, quick heads up. Your mum is on her way over. She called in to see you and was very surprised to learn you're living at your brother's place." The double exclamation mark was Michael's passive-aggressive way of telling Nina he was annoyed that she hadn't told her parents about their breakup, and she kicked herself, regretting telling him she would be staying at Dexter's. Angry that he had told her mum everything, Nina didn't bother to reply. Instead, she pulled off her sweaty clothes and tossed them in the washing machine, then took herself off for a cool shower, needing to douse her temper. It did the trick, and feeling clean and refreshed, she headed back into the shadowy living room. The sun was already setting through the balcony doors, her evening slipping away from her, and she hadn't even started to prepare dinner yet. Determined she was going to enjoy the rest of her Saturday night, she activated the apartment's smart hub, turning on low lights that bathed the kitchen and living room in an ambient glow, and selected a chilled playlist. The rich sounds of Lana Del Rey filled the room, filtering through the expensive wall speakers as Nina checked the recipe again, hunting through Dexter's cupboards for utensils and the rest of the ingredients she needed. There were a couple of things she would have to improvise on, but she had enough to make the dish. Turning on the hob and letting oil heat in a pan, she sang along with Lana while chopping lemon and red peppers. Moments later, everything went dead. Chapter 2. It took Nina a moment to realize the power was out. Initially, she swore at the lights, trying to get them to reactivate so she could see what she was doing. It was a second or two later that she noted the room was in silence. The washing machine stopped mid-cycle, and Lana was no longer keeping her company. And, damn it, the hob was off too. She tried to turn it back on, even though she knew deep down it was futile, swearing under her breath. Through the closed balcony doors, she could see lights twinkling in the distance. Other buildings still seemed to have electricity. So was this power cut isolated to Dexter and Mark's apartment? Or was the whole complex affected? In another 5 minutes or so, she would lose all light in the apartment, and conscious she needed to find out what was going on, she referred to the folder of information her brother had left her, grateful she had the contact details for the maintenance room and didn't have to wander downstairs in the dark. She phoned the number, glad when her call was answered after a couple of rings. "River-I, Dillon speaking." Nina would have recognized his voice even if she didn't know his name, remembering how their paths had crossed this morning when Dillon had helped her upstairs with her luggage after seeing her struggling to carry everything as she headed from her car through the courtyard garden. "Hi, it's Nina Fairchild in 5A. All of the power has gone in the apartment and I can't get it back on. Could you come and have a look, please?" "Sorry, Nina. It's out for everyone on the complex. But we're on it and trying to get it fixed, I promise. If you can just bear with us." He sounded a little harassed, and she felt bad. He was probably fielding calls from other residents, too. "Yes, of course." It was frustrating, but not his fault. "Do you know what's caused it?" "Not at the moment, but we're working on getting it back up and running as soon as possible." There wasn't much more she could ask, and she didn't want to keep him from fixing the problem. "Okay, thank you," she told him, ending the call. Although her belly was rumbling, light was currently top of her priority list, and she hunted through Dexter's cupboards and drawers for matches. He had plenty of candles scattered around the living room, so he must have a way to light them. It took her 10 minutes to locate the matches, using the torch on her mobile phone, by which time it was pitch black outside, and after lighting a dozen candles, careful to place them all high enough that Hannibal wouldn't knock them over, the room looked like she was about to hold a séance. Turning her attention back to her stomach, she considered what to do about dinner. Although she was reluctant to spend the money, she needed to eat, and didn't fancy salad or a sandwich. Resigned that she wasn't going to be able to have the fish tonight, she caved and ordered a pizza. By the time it arrived, she was hot and bothered again. Lack of power meant no air conditioning, and with the heat of the candles, the apartment was stifling. Opening the balcony doors made little difference, thanks to the humidity still clinging to the air. The delivery driver wasn't happy either, grumbling about having to negotiate the stairs using his phone light, and Nina was guilted into giving him a generous tip that she couldn't afford. She closed the door, the aroma of the food making her mouth water, deciding to take her dinner outside. Despite the damp heat, there was a light breeze making it slightly more tolerable, and at least here on the balcony, the traffic noise offered a reminder that the rest of the city was operating as normal. Sat back in one of the patio chairs, her bare feet resting on another, Nina tied her long hair back into a knot to try to cool her neck, before tucking into her pizza, comforted by the connection with the rest of the world that still had light. She could see buildings twinkling across the river and the reassuring glow of street lamps below, though across the courtyard gardens, the second apartment block on the complex was also shrouded in darkness. Turning to her phone, she started to scroll through her social media pages, conscious her battery was on 16% charge. She didn't want to run it down to 0 in case she needed to contact anyone. Dexter and Mark would be in the air now, on their way to Hong Kong. She wouldn't be able to speak to her brother until he landed. Not that he would be able to do anything to help when he was halfway around the world. From far off, sirens wailed, and Nina glanced up, seeing a flash of blue in the distance. It seemed to be heading in the direction of the apartments, but then it stopped. On Riverside Road, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. Briefly, she returned to her phone, but then more sirens and flashing lights distracted her. Curious, she peered over the balcony, wanting to know what was going on, but too far away to be able to see anything other than the lights. That was when she remembered the pair of binoculars sat inside on the dining table. They belonged to Mark, and she recalled how she had smiled when seeing them, knowing he was a big nature lover. It amused Nina and her parents, as Dexter didn't know anything about or have any interest in wildlife before meeting Mark. But since they had been together, he now readily agreed to go bird-watching on the North Norfolk coast, and sometimes spent his weekends out on a boat on the county's waterways, looking for otters and heron. Heading inside, dismayed that it was like walking into a sauna, she grabbed the binoculars, then went back out onto the balcony. Peering through them, Nina could see the flashing lights, but her view of what was going on was obstructed by trees. The sirens had stopped, and realizing it was probably just someone pulled over for speeding, she quickly lost interest. In the homes across the river, she could see windows illuminated, but most of them were too far below her to have a clear view. In a couple of them, she saw movement, though not enough to ascertain who was inside or what they were doing. None of her business, anyway. Bored, she nibbled at another pizza slice and sipped at her wine, glancing at the time on her phone and wishing the power would hurry up and come back on. Idly, she raised the binoculars again, scanning them over the city. From her vantage point, she could see Norwich Castle in the distance, perched on its hill and overlooking the lights of the city centre. The bars and restaurants would no doubt be heaving on such a warm summer's night. The cathedral stood out, perhaps more so than the castle, its elegant spire illuminated, as were the grounds below, and she had a good view of the law courts too. Dexter was so lucky having a home with this view. Well, technically it wasn't actually his place. He rented it. The apartment belonged to his best friend, Zach, and Dexter was Zach's tenant. Initially, they had been living together, but then Zach had upped and left to go travelling, and now her lucky bloody brother had the whole apartment to himself with 0 rent increase, even though Mark had moved in with him. The perks of being friends with someone who apparently had more money than sense. Okay, that was a little unfair. Zach's parents had been killed in a car accident a few years back, and as their only child, he'd ended up inheriting everything. Nina was sorry for what he had gone through, even if he was her childhood nemesis and had always tormented the hell out of her. Following the path of the river brought her back to where the apartment complex was, as the binoculars flickered over the other block. A few of the windows that had a couple of minutes before been dark were now illuminated, revealing whole new worlds. And they weren't lit by candlelight. The light was brighter than that. Had the power returned? A quick check of the light switch in the living room and the lack of humming from the aircon confirmed it was still out. Electricity must have just returned in the other block. Hopefully it was a good sign that she would have power back soon too. For now, she watched more windows lighting up in the other block, envious of the residents who were able to once again enjoy their building's air conditioning system. No such luxury for Nina, whose hot body was damp against the plastic patio chair. Sweat moistened her armpits and trickled between her breasts. The temptation not to pan back for a closer look was too great, and raising the binoculars, ignoring the stab of intrusive guilt, she found herself looking into the apartment opposite, where the inhabitants appeared to be having a poker night. Plates of nibbles sat on the table between the group as they sipped at drinks, and the conversation seemed to be in full flow. Candles still burned in the centre of the table, even though there was no longer a need for them. Moving along to the next lit window, the room appeared to be empty, but the glow from a table lamp showed her an apartment that was similar in layout and style to Dexter's, even down to the wide leather sofas and dark oak furniture. Further down, a woman was on her balcony, sat at a patio table, same as Nina, and was engrossed in her Kindle. And in the apartment next to her, a couple were moving around, looking like they had just arrived home. The woman, who was wearing a pretty summer dress, kicked off sandals before opening the balcony door and stepping outside. As she spoke with her partner, Nina switched apartments again. The neighbour next door was still reading, and the poker game continued. In the apartment that reminded her of Dexter's, a man was now sat on the sofa, and although Nina couldn't see the screen, she assumed from his stance he was watching TV. There were 2 further lights on now. In one of the apartments just below her, the soft glow of a floor lamp showed another empty apartment, but the owner must be home, as the balcony door was wide open. And the penthouse apartment, 1 level above her, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, was lit up. A man with dark hair paced back and forth along the wide balcony, a phone to his ear. It took Nina a second to realise she recognised him. He was the man from earlier, the attractive one she had passed on the bridge. And he looked angry. Intrigued, Nina watched, curious who he was talking to. Was it a fight with his wife or girlfriend? Or perhaps it was a work call. His free hand was agitated and kept pushing back into his hair, dishevelling it. She wondered what he did for a living. These apartments weren't cheap, and the penthouse would be next-level expensive. He still wore the linen shirt and chinos, and although his attire was casual, there was something commanding and confident about him that told her he liked to be in charge and not have to take orders from anyone. The call had ended now, and he was staring in disgust at his phone. Nina watched as he went back inside, then disappeared from sight. But then he was back again, and she could see he had made himself a drink. It looked like whiskey from where she was sat, or a similar liquor. He downed the contents of his glass, then, leaning against the railing, he stared in Nina's direction. She quickly dropped the binoculars. The 2 buildings were far enough apart that she didn't think he could see her, especially in the dark. But on the off chance he could, she didn't want to get caught snooping. With her naked eye, she could just about make out the silhouette of his figure, and when he disappeared back inside, she dared raise the binoculars again. Hoping he would reappear, she kept them focused on the penthouse apartment. Its balcony was far bigger than the one she was sitting on, and from what she could see, it wrapped around at least 2 sides of the building. Instead of a patio table and chairs, it was decorated with stylish sofas and a coffee table, with wall lanterns adding mood lighting. And was that a water feature nestled between a couple of tall potted palms? Yes, she was pretty sure it was. Nosing through the open doors, all of the furniture she could see looked expensive, with lots of galvanized metal and reclaimed wood, while elegant artwork and mirrors and delicate ornaments adorned the walls. It was like a show home, at least from this distance, and Nina doubted any children lived there. Unless he was divorced and had lost custody. Perhaps that was who he had been talking to, arguing with his ex-wife. She pictured him as a hard-working father with a high-flying, stressful job. Maybe he had put his career before his family, and his wife had ended things. So here he was with his new bachelor pad and custody of his daughter every other weekend. Yes, it was definitely a daughter, not a son, Nina decided, and he adored her. He had his show-home apartment and could afford all the fine things in life, but what he really wanted was his family. For a moment, she actually felt sorry for him, before realizing the life she had just created for him was entirely fictional. Briefly, she felt foolish, but then thought, to hell with it. She was stuck sitting here in the dark, 5 stories up, and with her phone battery running low, this was her only entertainment. She was hardly harming anyone if she made up a few stories in her head about the tenants in the neighbouring apartment block. It didn't look like the penthouse man was coming back out any time soon, she realised, and reluctantly she lowered the binoculars, returning to the other residents. The lady who had been reading had gone inside, the lights to her apartment switched off, and the couple next door to her were now cuddled up on the sofa, watching TV. Meanwhile, the poker group, who all looked to be a similar age to herself, were still going strong. It was yet another reminder of what she had just given up. She and Michael had often had friends over, either for dinner or a games night. But that wouldn't be happening anymore, and it occurred to her for the first time that their split would be awkward for their friendship group. Although they both had friends outside of the relationship, the other key couple they socialised with was Tori, who Nina had known since high school, and Michael's cousin, Kyle. Would Tori be biased and try to persuade Nina she was making a mistake? Was she making a mistake? Until now, Nina had been so certain leaving Michael was the right thing to do. But sitting here alone in the dark with her thoughts, doubts crept in. Michael was safe and kind, and although they weren't always compatible, he had made her feel comfortable. She did love him, but in a fond way that had grown out of familiarity. There was no longer any passion in their relationship. But then, perhaps she was expecting too much, and the spark was meant to die down into friendship. Could she go back? Did she want to go back? It would be easier. Scary as it was taking this next step alone, Nina knew the answer was still a resounding no. She wanted the chance to carve her own path, even if it meant making sacrifices, and Michael deserved someone who truly loved him and wanted to be with him for all the right reasons. Pushing him from her mind, she put the binoculars down on the table, then took her plate and wineglass inside, surprised by the drop in temperature as she stepped through the patio door. It took her a second to register, but then she heard the low hum of the air conditioning and realised the power must have come back on. Trying the light switch again, a warm glow lit up the room, and Nina sighed in relief. She had started to worry she would be without power all night, and wondered how the hell she would manage to sleep. There were still several slices of pizza left, and deciding she would have those for breakfast the following morning, she put the box in the fridge, then restarted the washing machine cycle. It was only 10 p.m., and she was too restless to go to bed yet, so she poured another glass of wine, blew out the candles, and switched on the TV. At some point while watching an episode of the Graham Norton show on catch-up, she fell asleep, Hannibal snoozing on her lap. It was some time later that a piercing scream awoke her. Chapter 3. The blonde had caught Julian Wiseman's eye as he was sipping his second whiskey. She was at a table with friends, some kind of celebration meal, judging by the gift bags and balloons on the table. She was the loudest, talking over everyone, but she also kept glancing in his direction, with her smoky eyes and red, smirky lips, and he could tell she'd had a little too much to drink. Just the way he liked them. Vulnerable, promiscuous, and gullible. He was tempted to flirt with her, ply her with some more alcohol, then persuade her to leave with him. It wouldn't be difficult. He knew he had the looks and charm, the gift of the gab, and also the right amount of confidence. Women loved him, and she was his type, slim and pretty. On another night, Blondie would be easy pickings. But the call from his father had soured his mood and lowered his libido. He had a feeling that tonight he might need more than a quick fuck. It was the same old shit. Kevin Wiseman was cutthroat and obsessed when it came to his company, putting work before family and everything else, and he couldn't understand why his eldest son didn't share the same drive, continually picking at him. Julian had been back in the UK now for nearly a year. When was he going to get his life on track, join the family business and stop taking the piss, using the family name and living on handouts? His dad spoke as if Julian had never done a day's work in his life, but that simply wasn't true. He had followed his father's wishes, studying and obtaining a degree in business management. Then, while living in the US, he had helped oversee his uncle's string of bars. It wasn't his fault that the nightclub venture he had been trying to push forward since coming home had failed. There had just been too much red tape and issues with noise pollution. Of course, Kevin Wiseman didn't see it that way, and now he was making threats about taking away Julian's home and his car, and cutting his monthly allowance if he didn't get his act together and take his place on the board of directors in his property development firm. Julian couldn't allow that to happen. He was relying on his father until he could find a way to get back on his feet. He just needed to get another business venture going, and that was going to take time. Working for Wiseman Homes and having to answer to his father every day wasn't something he was cut out for. He downed the rest of his drink, caught the eye of the bartender to order another, and tried to roll the tension out of his shoulders. He hadn't planned to come out tonight, but after the call from his dad, he was just too damn angry and needed to escape his apartment. He loved living in the penthouse, a perk of having your dad own the building, but knowing his funds could be stopped and he might lose it left him feeling caged. The only reason he had been allowed to live there in the first place was because it was sitting empty, much to his father's annoyance. River Heights had been one of Kevin Wiseman's big visions for the city, but it had been hampered with issues from day one. The build had been problematic, and there were frequent power outages and problems with the lifts, plus fire safety issues with the cladding, which all had to be replaced. The apartments were sleek and spacious, but it had put buyers off, especially for the most expensive homes. Still, his father's misfortune was Julian's gain, and he needed to figure out how to keep the home and lifestyle he loved. Brooding, he had skulked through the streets, ignoring the groups of pissed-up kids who were littering the pavements like vermin. The silly little bastards thought they were all so cocky and grown up, but they had no idea about life. His venue of choice was the Rooftop Gardens, a restaurant and bar that sat atop an office block offering a different view across the city. As he tapped his card now against the contactless machine and picked up his fresh drink, he noticed Blondie's table was getting ready to go. There was lots of hugging going on, while the most sober of the group gathered up the gift bags and cards. Now that she was standing, Julian could see that Blondie was wearing a short, tight leather skirt and spiky-heeled red shoes. His dick stirred. Yes, she was just his type. She was still looking at him, as though debating whether to come over and talk to him. Not wanting to encourage her, Julian reluctantly looked away. Sorry, Blondie. Not tonight. He wasn't sure he would be able to control himself around her. Often, he was satisfied with a quick fuck in a nightclub toilet, but tonight he needed more, and there were far too many witnesses who could see them leaving together. He also had to be careful with the women he selected. When he had these urges to satisfy, discretion was key. He couldn't get caught. He didn't know enough about this one. Yet. He watched her totter away in her skyscraper heels, looking disappointed, and he wondered if he was making a mistake. But then she was gone, and he was left to sip his whiskey and ponder his future. It was wandering back to his apartment an hour later, having stopped for a late-night kebab, that Julian saw her again. She was in the Tombland area of the city, and stumbling towards him, no doubt to the taxi queue Julian had just passed, and looking suitably worse for wear. And none of her friends were with her. That last observation piqued Julian's interest. Friends could be cumbersome, and sometimes the voice of reason. It was better for him that she was now alone. Well, it would be if he intended to stop and speak to her, which he didn't. But then she glanced up and caught his eye, her lips curving up when she recognized him. "I know you," she slurred. "You were in the rooftop gardens." Julian should ignore her, just carry on walking. He wasn't thinking clearly, and Blondie here, with her panda eyes from where her smoky makeup had smeared and her too short skirt, offered too much temptation. He lowered his head and went to walk past her, but felt the grip of fingers on his arm. "That kebab smells really good. Can I have a bite?" She was looking hopefully at him now, all red pout, a ruby pendant glittering at her throat, and he wanted to tell her no, but instead he paused. She was that delicious mix of sass and stupidity that was so easy to manipulate, and it was making him weak. "Go on, just one bite," she pleaded. "I'm really hungry, and my feet are killing me." A quick glance around told him they were not being watched. There were people about, but they were either too inebriated or busy looking at their phones. Not that it mattered. He didn't know this woman, so it would just be straight sex, something to blow off a little steam. He would have to find a way to control his other cravings. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Heatherset," came the reply. About 6 miles out of the city, too far out to walk back to her place. Could he trust himself to take her back to his apartment? The whiskey was impairing his judgment, and this woman was practically throwing herself at him. He just had to behave himself. To hell with it. Holding out the kebab, he let her take a bite. "My place is just up the road if you fancy a nightcap." He expected her to jump at the opportunity, so it surprised him when she wavered. "Thanks, but I should go get a cab." Really? That was unexpected. Perhaps he had her pegged wrong after all. "You can have my number if you like," she offered. Keen, but wary too. He had always liked a challenge, but his true desires and what he wanted to do with her burned a fire deep inside him. That scared him. She was a temptation, but if he got carried away, it could come back to bite him on the arse. He thought back to 6 years ago and the murder of Katie Spencer. For a while there, he had been the prime suspect, and honestly believed he would end up rotting in prison. His father had been appalled at the shame brought on the family, their reputable name splattered all over the papers, and he had never stopped letting Julian know about it, even though he was eventually released without charge. In Kevin's eyes, mud stuck, and people would always connect his eldest son to what had happened. One more fuck-up, and he would probably be cut out of the old man's will. Julian ignored Blondie's request, instead giving her a quick smile. "I should get home." Now he could see she was disappointed, but still he walked away. "Wait," she called after him. Instead of stopping, he ignored her, picking up his pace. Yes, she was definitely keen, and knowing her eagerness made her vulnerable to his needs. His resolve weakened. "Hold on, I've changed my mind," she shouted after him. Julian kept walking, aware there was a CCTV camera up ahead, but only one. Once he reached the river path, he was safe. "Come along, Blondie," he silently lured. Hearing the tottering of her heels trying to catch him up, he smiled. Easy pickings. Chapter 4. Nina sat bolt upright on the sofa, and for a moment she had no idea where she was, or what time it was. As she shook off the haze of sleepiness, she realized the scream had come from the TV, which was now playing a movie. Hannibal had moved from her lap to the arm of the sofa and was watching her hopefully. Nina knew he would be hoping for some of the bedtime cat treats Dexter often gave him. Her neck ached from the awkward position she had been lying in, and she rolled her shoulders, cursing when she saw it was gone midnight. Half a glass of the wine she had been drinking sat on the coffee table, and, not fancying it, having been asleep, she got up and poured it down the sink, then fetched the Dreamies Hannibal loved. He purred as he ate them, and she turned her attention to the blinking light of the washing machine, which had ended its cycle. Although it was late and she wanted to go to bed, her things would be crumpled and smell musty if left overnight, so she quickly pulled them from the machine, shaking out the creases and hanging everything on the clothes horse. Figuring her washing would dry quicker outside, she opened the patio door and pushed the clothes horse out onto the balcony, surprised by how warm it still was. Down below, the city was still awake, with clusters of lights and bursts of noise penetrating the silence. Nina was about to go back in, when her attention was drawn to the top of the opposite block of apartments. Penthouse man was still awake. Was he out on the balcony? She thought the doors were open, though it was difficult to be sure from this distance. She rubbed at her eyes, suddenly a whole lot more awake, and glanced at the binoculars, her moral compass wavering as she picked them up. Just a quick peek wouldn't do any harm. She would look to satisfy her curiosity, then put them back inside where she had first found them. Shaking off her guilt, she trained them on the penthouse, the balcony coming into focus. She had been right about the doors. They were open, though she couldn't see him anywhere. Perhaps he had fallen asleep, like she had, though there was no sign of life inside the apartment, which was lit by the low glow of a table lamp. Nina was about to go back inside when she spotted movement in the doorway at the back of the room, and the man stepped into her line of vision. He went straight over to the kitchen, pulling a bottle of wine from the fridge and taking down glasses from an overhead cupboard. 2 glasses. For the first time, she realized he was talking to someone. A woman. Nina could see her now, and that she was pretty. Blonde hair and slim, with long, slender legs shown off by heeled red stilettos and a short leather skirt. The sting of jealousy was unexpected. She didn't even know Penthouse Man. She had created this whole life for him in her head, but none of it was true. As she watched, wine was poured, and the woman tipped her head back and laughed at something the man had said, a red heart pendant glittering at her throat, before demurely drinking from her glass. They were moving now, out onto the balcony, and giving Nina a bird's-eye view. Realizing the light was on behind her, and scared they might spot her watching, she called through to Alexa to switch it off. As darkness shrouded her, she felt a little less conspicuous. This pair were too wrapped up in each other to pay attention, Penthouse Man now taking the woman's glass and moving behind her, his hands on her shoulders, then moving into her hair, pushing it to one side as his mouth dipped to kiss her neck. Nina needed to put the binoculars down and go to bed, give this couple their privacy. She was uncomfortably hot, perhaps in part because of what she was doing, knowing it was wrong, as well as because of the muggy night air. Her neck was damp and her skin on fire. She should go in, but it wasn't happening. She was too invested, watching as the man became rougher and more urgent in his actions. One hand tangled in the woman's hair, the other going to her throat and pulling her back. She seemed startled by the change of pace, her eyes widening as he clawed at her top, dragging it up and over her head. Then the too-short skirt was being tugged down the woman's long legs, swiftly followed by her knickers. Hell, this guy didn't waste any time. One moment, Nina was double blinking as the woman stood there completely naked, except the red shoes. The next, her mouth dropped open as she realized Penthouse Man had dropped his trousers and was pushing the woman down onto her knees. As the woman took him in her mouth, he held her in place, rocking back and forth on his heels as he stared up at the stars. Nina really needed to look away. If they realized she was watching, they would be mortified, and so would she. It was wrong spying on them like this. Except she couldn't bring herself to drop the binoculars. Instead, she continued to watch. The woman had stopped now, though stayed on her knees, and Penthouse Man, whose dick was still rock hard, was handing her something. A condom, Nina realized, watching her put it on him. No sooner had she finished than Penthouse Man had pulled her up to her feet and had her pressed against the balcony, one hand tangled in her hair again, the other reaching past her to grip the railing. As he thrust into her from behind,